Alright, I'm gonna finally start making my Kings of War videos. In order to keep this from going too long, I'm going to be splitting it up into sections. This one's going to be the general concepts of the games, so units, base sizes, arcs of sight, line of sight, and the profiles for the units. And we'll get into the turn sequence and movement and combat and stuff like that later. So first let's start with what you need to actually play the game. So a good place to start is the rulebook. Whether you get the physical copy or digital edition, that either one will do. They're both the same versions. I own both, and they are identical for lore and rules. The free rules available online have almost everything in there as well, especially if you're just looking to try out the game, so that's an option as well. And then you're going to need a tape measure and some dice. And then you're going to need some models. Now, what type of models you need is going to be determined by the type of units that you bring into battle with you. The unit types will have a standard size base depending on what type of unit it is. So for your standard infantry, they will have a 20mm square base. Depending on how large of a unit you field, you have the option of choosing either troops, which are 10 models on the left there, regiments, which is the 20, and then hordes, which is 40, and legions, which is 60. Depending on which one you field, they will have different stats and costs. The more models in a unit, the more damage it can take before it'll break, and the more attacks it will have, but the more expensive it will be and the more space it takes up on the table, obviously. So there are some special infantry, such as orcs, that have larger bases. Those are the 25mm square bases. If that is the case, it will tell you in their army list what base size they're on. All the units do have to be in this configuration, so for the infantry they've got to be 5x2 for troops, 5x4 for regiments, 10x4 for hordes, and 10x6 for legion. They are set in those positions. There's no changing the depth of your ranks. They're always going to be in that depth of rank. And so it's the same for the cavalry here. They're fielded on a 25x50mm base, and their troops, rather than 10, it's 5 for cavalry troops, 10 for a regiment, and 20 for a horde. Large infantry are fielded on a 40mm square base, and their regiments have 3, and their hordes have 6. Their legions would have 12, so you would add another 6 next to that. I don't have the models for it, but that's what they would be. And then monstrous cavalry and war machines and monsters are all on 50mm square bases. And then there are some special units that have the 50x100, and it will say in their army entry if they do have a special base like that. So all heroes have a base that is corresponding to their unit type. A hero will have an indication of what kind of unit type it is in its army entry. So a hero slash infantry will be on a single 20mm base. A hero slash large infantry would be on a 40mm base, and so on. So in Kings of War, every unit has 4 facings. They have their front arc, their side arcs, and their rear arc, as well as a leader point, which is the exact center of the front of the unit, usually where that front model will be, but the exact center of that unit. It's used in measuring line of sight. So a unit can only see things that are directly in their front arc. Basically, they're blind on the sides and the back. Now, just because something is in its front arc does not necessarily mean the unit will be able to see. If there's something large blocking their way, for example. In order to determine whether something is blocking a unit's way, every every unit type in the game has a height value. So for infantry it would be 1, for large infantry it's 2, for cavalry it's 2, for large cavalry it's 3, and for monsters it's 4, for war engines it's 1. So in order to determine whether the unit can see another unit or not, you draw a line from their unit's leader point to any point on the enemy unit that you're trying to see. If any units or terrain with a larger height value are in the way of that line that you draw to your enemy, then line of sight is blocked and they cannot see the unit that's behind the taller unit. However, if either unit is taller than the unit in between, then you can see over top. So these are both infantry units at height 1, and this is a cavalry unit at height 2. The cavalry unit can see this unit of infantry, and that unit of infantry can see that cavalry unit. Keep in mind that line of sight does not have to be the shortest line between your unit leader point and the target base. Any line from the unit leader point to the target will work. If you're unsure whether or not your unit can see another unit, just roll a dice. On a 4+ it can, on a less than that it can't. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about stats. This is an example of the stats that you would see available for a unit in its army roster. It'll show you at the top right there what type it is, so whether it's infantry, cavalry, etc. Its unit size options, so whether or not you can take a troop, a regiment, a horde, a legion. Not always will you have all of those options available to you. The speed, which is how fast the unit moves in inches. The melee rating, that's the score needed by the unit to hit in melee on a d6. The ranged attack, which is the score needed by the unit to hit with its ranged attack on a d6 again. If it doesn't have a ranged attack, it'll just be a dash. Its defense, which is the dice roll that your opponent needs to roll to damage the unit. Its attack characteristic, so this is how many attacks it has, both in close combat and with its ranged attack. They're identical. Its nerve, which is a combination of the unit's size and its training, discipline, or summon strength, whatever it may be. But that stat shows how resistant the unit is to damage suffered, and how many points the unit costs. And at the bottom there, any special rules that it might have, including its equipment. So just to give you an idea for each of the stats what an average might be. Your speed is usually an average of 5. So over 5 is above average, below 5 is below average. Melee rating, usually an average is 4. Range attack, the average is actually 5. And defense, the average is 4. For a regiment, usually the attack average is 10 or 12, depending on the unit type. If it can shoot, usually it has less attacks. And then the nerve varies quite a bit, and it's especially dependent upon how large the unit is. So besides the stuff I just mentioned, one of the universal rules is you can't reroll a reroll. That's in a lot of tabletop games. If an ability gives you something in order to reroll a dice that failed to hit or wound or something like that, regardless of what the second roll is after you've re-rolled it, you have to stick with it, whether it's worse or not. No re-rolling rule. And the other one is that you cannot have a guaranteed chance of success or a guaranteed chance to fail, regardless of what buffs you might have or the strength of your character. 1 will always fail to hit, and a 1 will always fail to wound, and a 6 will always hit, and a 6 will always wound. So it's just a quick little video to get started on this process, because if I didn't get something done, I probably would never actually start working on it. Next we'll be taking a look at the turn sequence and moving on to the movement phase, and that's going to be the next video. Alright, we'll see you then.